How's it going, guys? Thank you for tuning in, as today we're going to talk about the winter of 2024 and 2025 and really determine how much snow you could expect in each area of the United States. Will it be a colder than normal winter in your area, or will it be a warmer than normal winter and drier as well? I'm going to take a look at several different factors in this video to really give you guys the best, most accurate representation of what you should expect this winter. So first, let's take a look at the winter of 1981 and 1982. And you're probably wondering, Javi, why are you showing me why are you talking about the winter of 1981 and 1982? Well, the reason is that by taking a look at the polar vortex for years that are very similar to the conditions we're experiencing right now when it comes to a polar vortex, we could potentially come into a more accurate representation of what's going to happen this winter based on a year that's very similar to what we're experiencing this year. And as you can see, for October 2024, at least for this year, we are experiencing a record-breaking weak polar vortex. And the other year that was that did have a record-breaking weak polar vortex during the month of October was the winter of 1981 and 1982. And if we were to take a look at the months that happened after this record-breaking event, we see that the polar vortex ended up being much weaker than normal, especially right around the early part of the winter time frame, right around December and January. And what a weaker polar vortex means is that we're more likely to experience a cold, heavier snowfall, because a weaker polar vortex means that the jet stream is weaker, so it allows the cold air that's pretty much trapped right over the North Pole to be able to find a way to move further southward and to meander further southward into the United States. If I were to give an example, take a stream, for example. When a stream is very strong, it's more the water is more likely to move in one direction because the pressure of the stream is just so strong that it doesn't really have much, it doesn't really have the energy to move outside of where the flow of water is coming from. However, if let's say the stream of a river is a lot weaker, then that allows the water to have a little bit more leeway when it comes to spreading out, since the energy is very strong to where it'll focus all that discharge towards one area, and it'll be able to spread, the water would be able to spread out a little bit more and a lot more easily. It's pretty much the same concept when it comes to a polar vortex. And based on what we saw this during the winter of 1981 and 1982, we typically experience more polar vortex this winter compared to the average winter. And if I were to show you guys temperature and pressure anomalies for the year of 1981 and 1982, we see that the pressure is much lower during the winter of 1981 and 1982 when we see a weak polar vortex that's similarly as weak as what we're experiencing right now. So this gives a good indication that there is that possibility for a colder and snowier than normal winter. Of course, this is a very small sample size because this is literally the only year where we did see record-breaking weak polar vortex during the month of October. So definitely take this with a grain of salt, but it's at least something to be aware of going into this winter, as I certainly wouldn't rule out that possibility that the colder temperatures could move a little bit further southward than many of these forecast models think, as well as many of these other winter forecasts have been stating. Thanks to this fact alone, that we're experiencing a record-breaking weak polar vortex, and this prior year has shown that it could lead to an overall colder winter by the time we approach December and into February. Another thing I want to show you, which I believe does have a little bit more validity to it, thanks to the fact that there is a larger sample size for us to maybe detect a trend when it comes to this pattern, is the QBO pattern, which you probably never heard of before, but it's pretty much a wind pattern right just so north of the equator in the very high elevations of the atmosphere, more towards the stratosphere, where the millibar pressure hovers around 15 millibars and 100 millibars, where the wind direction shifts between a westerly direction, which is considered a positive QB QBO pattern, or a negative phase, which would be considered a negative QBO pattern. And if you were to take a look at the past few months, you see that we've been in a negative QBO pattern. However, we're quickly approaching a positive QBO pattern, which means that the westerly winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere are starting to kick in, especially right over the northern hemisphere at this point. And we have seen a trend where this pattern could play a role when it comes to the type of winter conditions the United States could experience. Of course, there are a ton of other factors, and we need to take this with a grain of salt, because while the sample size of the analog years that do show this sort of weather pattern is larger than the prior analog year I showed you, there's still, the sample size is still relatively small, so this might not necessarily be a complete indication that we're going to experience conditions that are very similar to what we see during a positive La Nina QBO pattern. However, I think there's still a decent level enough of a trend to where I wouldn't rule out, I wouldn't completely dismiss this pattern either when it comes to forecasting what type of winter you should expect in the United States this winter. So this is how winters are right over North America typically look like when we transition from a negative QBO pattern to a positive QBO pattern during the fall months and approaching the winter time. And as you can see, during all these years, they all show that the pressure tends to be a lot lower over the United States, more specifically right over the northern United States, as well as much of Canada. And what this means is that you're certainly far more likely to experience colder and snowier than normal conditions, because since there's such a strong area of low pressure right over Canada and the United States, we see that there's going to be a ridge just right over the northern Pacific, and what this will create is a pressure gradient to where the northwesterly wind flow will increase, and of course thanks to a rain shadow that exists right over the Cascades, that will lead to far more cooler than normal conditions, most likely, if the scenario were to build like this. And since we have seen a pattern where a positive QBO pattern during La Nina years does lead to much colder than normal conditions, I am certainly taking this into consideration when making this winter forecast, as I do believe, especially more specifically right over the northwestern portion of the United States as well as the northern Midwest, you will experience a colder and snowier than normal winter for the 2024-2025 season. And it's also going to be amplified by a weak La Nina, which is typically what we already see in the northern Midwest and the northwestern portion of the United States. However, from what I've been seeing from a lot of these winter forecasts, they have been dismissing the possibility of a colder and snowier than normal winter for the Northeast as well as the Great Lakes, mainly due to the fact that a weak La Nina isn't typically associated with those conditions and the drought that's going on over the eastern United States right now. However, I think a lot of these forecast models as well as these winter forecasts have been ignoring this blatant pattern where we have plenty of analog years where that do show some sort of trend when it comes to colder and snowy than normal conditions. So while I won't confidently say as of right now it's definitely going to be colder and snowier than normal for the Northeast, but I do think that there's a higher possibility than what's been said from a lot of these winter forecasts over the past few months, thanks to this pattern, since it clearly has been quite a trend when it comes to a pattern like this. So I'm definitely taking this into consideration when making this winter forecast as well. So now I'm going to show you guys what I've been talking about over the past several winter forecast videos. This is what we typically see during weak La Nina years, and as you can clearly see for the northern Midwest as well as Pacific Northwest, it's typically much colder than normal, where the temperature anomaly hovers anywhere between 3 to 4 degrees below normal. Now, of course, every day won't be 3 to 4 degrees below normal. There are certainly going to be days where it's going to be much colder than that, and there's going to be some days where it's going to be warmer than that, but most likely for the winter time frame, you're going to experience more colder days than you will more warmer than average days for much of these areas, most likely. We do see that the anomaly extends further southward. However, the anomaly isn't very strong, so I'd almost disregard it if I were you in the southwestern portion of the United States, because the anomaly is so weak that I think it could easily be offset by another pattern that would bring warmer and drier than normal conditions right over the southwestern portion of the United States. And I think that this drought going on will continue, and that will, I think, sort of offset the possibility it will be colder than normal in the southwestern portion of the United States, as if anything, thanks to this drought, I do believe it'll be warmer than normal right over these areas. And then for the eastern United States, we clearly do see that the temperature is mainly average during weak La Nina years compared to the long-term average. Many of the computer models, which I'm going to show you in a second, are leaning towards it being slightly warmer than average and much warmer than average right over the southeast. However, prior weak La Nina years haven't really shown a strong indication of that, so which makes me a bit skeptical that the computer models will be completely correct when it comes to that, because the weak La Ninas haven't really shown to bring much warmer than normal conditions over these areas. But it's still something to take into consideration, and like I showed you with the previous QBO pattern, I do believe there's that possibility it could still be colder than normal right over the northeast. So stay tuned for further updates once we get a little bit more details regarding how maybe the Pacific North American oscillation will look over the next several weeks, because that could give a good indication of what to expect when it comes to the winter time for much of these areas in the United States, especially in the eastern United States, where it's a bit more of a wild card when it comes to the type of temperatures you should see. But for the northern Midwest as well as Pacific Northwest, I do expect it to be much colder than normal this winter, as pretty much all indications, even the QBO phase that I just showed you, are leaning towards that idea. So that makes me very confident it'll be quite a winter for much of the northern Midwest. And here's the precipitation anomalies we typically see during weak La Nina years compared to the long-term average. We clearly see that that's typically much drier than normal, more specifically right over Florida. And interestingly enough, it's drier than normal right up along the west coast of the United States, more specifically much of the coastal cities. However, while it might be drier right up along the coastal cities, it still will likely be colder than normal right over the Pacific Northwest. But for the southwestern portion of the United States, especially since you already are in a drought, and this weak La Nina typically brings drier than normal conditions over this area right over California, I do still expect it to be drier than normal, which I think in return should lead to warmer than normal temperatures right over the southwestern portion of the United States. And in terms of areas where you do receive more precipitation than usual, it's more so right around the Cascade and Rocky Mountain ranges, as well as the Great Lakes region, which isn't very unusual for La Nina years in general, as it's very typical for the jet stream to move over this area and bring more precipitation and low pressure systems right over the Great Lakes as well as the Rocky Mountain ranges. So I do believe that will contribute to more snowfall than usual, especially since it is expected to be colder than normal for much of the northern United States, thanks to a weak La Nina. A positive QBO pattern will possibly enhance it, and the fact that taking a look at prior polar vortex years that are very similar to this season, I do believe it will be colder than most people think in the northern United States, and including the northeast. What's interesting, however, is that the mid-Atlantic during weak La Nina years does have a slight anomaly where it's drier than normal. And if you've been paying attention to the type of weather conditions that's been happening in the Northeast over the past several weeks, we are currently under a severe drought in many of these areas, as there's just been a strong dominant ridge bringing much warmer and drier than normal conditions right over the Northeast. And there could maybe be that possibility a weak La Nina could contribute to that. We're going to have to wait and see. However, I do expect that eventually the weak La Nina will take over soon. And in a place like the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, it's more rare than, let's say, the areas further westward for them to be stuck in a drought for that long. So I eventually do expect the drought to go away, especially in the late winter time frame, where it seems like even the computer models are focusing in more on the Northeast when it comes to potential low pressure system trajectories. So I do expect the drought to go away, but don't be surprised if, who knows, maybe this drought could continue by the time we approach winter time frame, thanks to the drought we are already in right now, as well as a weak La Nina. Another thing that I've also been showing you guys over the past few winter forecast videos is snowfall patterns for weak La Nina years, and we clearly see it for much of the northern United States. No surprise, you do experience more snowfall than usual, and even portions of the Northeast you experience more snowfall than usual. And I think the reason is that during La Nina years there is a higher amount of polar vortexes. So while the temperature typically during weak La Nina years might fall closer to average for much of the Northeast, I do believe that there is a higher possibility of polar vortexes. So while it might be average for much of the winter, there could be those 1 or 2 days, or maybe that 1 week, where you experience a polar vortex that brings just a ton of snow to the Northeast just off of 1 or 2 snowstorms during the winter, as that's really all you need in some of these areas to receive your average or a slightly above average amount of snowfall in the Northeast during the winter time frame. So I do believe this could also contribute to the possibility of receiving more snowfall than usual in Northeast, combined with the fact that there's going to be a positive QBO pattern. And for the northern United States, it's no surprise you do experience more snowfall than usual, since it's simply colder than normal in this area of the US. Another thing that's fairly important to take a look at is what the climatological models are stating. And for the 3-month average between December, January, and February for the MME model, it's expected to be warmer than normal for this winter. And however, we do have an anomaly that's a little bit closer to average right over the northwestern portion of the United States, and we in fact do have a small low pressure system that is bringing slightly below normal conditions right off the East Coast. And while you might look at this at face value and think that it's automatically going to be a warmer than normal winter for much of the United States, however, what weak La Nina years typically bring is fairly different from what this computer model is stating. So I take this a little bit more with a grain of salt. This computer model also has a strong bias towards bringing warmer than normal temperatures. So you also need to take that with a grain of salt as well. And this computer model pretty much forecasts what's going to happen in the long-term future, just based solely off of just basic laws of physics. And of course, since this forecast is months away, it could be very difficult to forecast. Even though this computer model combines all of the most reliable computer models to create one model solution, it's still a very long-term forecast. So it might not necessarily line up exactly like this, but from what I'm seeing with this temperature anomaly, while it is warmer than what you'd see during weak La Nina years, the exact areas where you do experience warmer temperatures and relative to a weak La Nina are sort of similar, because during weak La Nina years we do see the strongest anomalies focus more in on the southern United States, while for the weakest anomalies, and in fact the below normal anomalies, are located in the northern Midwest as well as Pacific Northwest. And as you can see in this computer model, that's where the weakest anomalies are located, which is, when you compare, relatively speaking, it is in line with what we see during weak La Nina years. So I think that there is some truth to this model and some accuracy with this computer model. So definitely keep that in mind as well. However, another thing I want to show you guys is more so specifically the month temperature anomaly. And why I want to show you this is that we see during February, that's when the anomalies are expected to become the weakest overall when it comes to above average temperatures for the United States, more sickly right over the Pacific Northwest and even extending into the Northeast. We do have that small area where the anomalies will almost be non-existent, which makes me believe there could be that possibility where the jet stream tracks right over this area and does bring more clipper systems, potentially the strongest polar vortexes during the month of February, since we do have that small area where the pressure could be low enough to bring more snowstorms to the Northeast. So that's definitely something I want to outline, because I do believe that this small area where the anomalies are lower could lead to more snowstorms in the Northeast. So definitely keep that in mind by the time we approach February. And it's the reason why I'm expecting the winter time to bring the most snowstorms to the Northeast right around, or potentially the United States in general, right around the February timeframe this season, thanks to what the computer models are stating. When it comes to a precipitation anomaly, this is more in line with what we typically see during weak La Nina years, much drier than normal throughout the southern United States, thanks to the jet stream being far further northward, and we see more moist than normal conditions right over the Pacific Northwest and the Ohio River Valley, which again, very similar to what we'd expect during a La Nina. So I'd say this is very accurate of what to expect this winter. And of course, we can't end this video without taking a look at the drought monitor for the United States. And nearly the entirety of the United States is under some sort of drought, with the exception of the Southeast, of course, since we did see Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene bring plenty of precipitation over this area. But for the Northeast, the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, and Southern California, you guys are all under severe to abnormally dry conditions throughout the United States. So I do expect this, like I said, to continue for the southwestern portion of the United States, contributing to a warmer and drier than normal winter. And for the Northeast, I do expect it to go away eventually, since a La Nina will eventually take over. And I do believe that we eventually will experience a weak enough polar vortex to bring more cold and snow into this area, which will eventually take away the drought over the Northeast. But for the Midwest as well as the southwestern portion of the United States, I expect that drought to continue, which should contribute to warmer than normal conditions. So here's my overall winter forecast for 2024-2025. So for the Northeast, the Interstate 95 corridor more specifically, I'm expecting this winter to bring late season snowstorms, more sickly right around the February timeframe. I do believe that we're going to start the winter potentially a little bit warmer than normal. Of course, it's going to be contributed thanks to the drought we're currently experiencing. I don't expect that to go away right away. So December could be warmer and drier than normal, but with the computer models bringing the temperature anomalies a little bit down by the time we approach the later portion of the winter timeframe, more sickly in February, and the fact that I do believe the positive QBO pattern will contribute to more snowstorms and a stronger jet stream dip than what most computer models are expecting at this time. I expect that this winter will start a little bit later and you'll experience the snowstorms a little bit later, which I think will result in around an average winter for much of the Interstate 95 corridor cities. And then for the Southeast, expected to be much warmer and drier than normal. Again, no surprise, that's what we typically see during weak La Nina years. It should be more moist than normal right over the Ohio River Valley. And then of course for much of the northern United States, the northern Midwest, as well as the Pacific Northwest, you should expect it to be much colder and snowier than normal, as this should be the worst of the winter when it comes to cold and snowfall, thanks to a weak La Nina, a positive QBO pattern, as well as a weaker polar vortex that could potentially take place by the time we approach the winter time frame, thanks to the record-breaking weak polar vortex we're seeing right now. And then for the southwestern portion of the United States, I expect it to be much warmer and drier than normal, thanks to a weak La Nina. So this is my winter forecast for 2024, 2020, and 2025. If you want an even more in-detail forecast regarding what you should expect this winter when it comes to snowfall, as well as how cold it'll be or how how warm it'll be, just make sure to comment down your area or location down below in the comment section, and I'll do my best to try to answer what type of winter you should expect in your specific location. So make sure to comment down below if you're interested. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.